Reid, welcome to Denver.
Thank you. I love this town, so I'm always delighted when you invite me.
Delighted to have you back, and so grateful to get the chance to get your thoughts and insights as the kickoff to this conference. So we'll jump right in because I know people are excited to hear from you. Obviously, you have been a leader and a visionary in this space for a long time. Tell us at the highest level about how do you see AI fundamentally transforming industries and society as a whole? What are the big picture trends we should be thinking about and prepared for as we look at what's possible?
Well, it doesn't surprise you. I could literally spend the next 50 minutes answering that question, so I'll try to be a little brief. So there's a couple different ways of looking at it. One is every task that we do with language will have a co-pilot. So, and we do a lot of tasks with language. It's not just, kind of writing memos and so forth. We coordinate meetings, we do financial analysis, we do legal work, we do medical diagnosis, we do all of these things. Everything that language, there will be a co-pilot for professional activity. Another way of looking at it is that anything that has a computational unit in it is going to get smarter. And so, you naturally think, your phone, your computer. But by the way, the camera, the cameras that are filming us right now, speakers, cars, stoplights eventually, etc. And so intelligence will get spread like electricity. Now, I know that people because it's such a transformative technology, and one of the ways I describe it is a cognitive industrial revolution. So it's like a steam engine of the mind. And the Industrial Revolution was enormously beneficial for creating a middle class, for creating the kind of productivity that led to literate societies, that did all that. The transition is challenging. And I think that transition, I think the end state is very, very good. I think we have to try to navigate the transition better than we did with the Industrial Revolution. Now, the good news about it is that you say, hey, my job as a marketer is going to change because now I'm going to use this tool that when I'm thinking about which marketing slogan and image should I use to display, Denver's amazing place to come for tourism industry. And you're going to use AI and you're going to get 20 different answers very quickly. And you're going to be sorting through going, okay, the thing that would have taken me like a team of 3 to 7 people to do in a week, I can do the first prototype in 30 minutes on my own. And you go, oh my God, does that totally change everything? Well, it does. So the person has to learn how to do new things, and one of the benefits is AI can help you learn to do that. So how do I learn the new skills? How do I learn AI to do this well? But as a kind of a lens of hope, when VisiCalc and Excel were created, people thought, okay, accountants are going to go away, right? Because what accountants used to do is they used to have these ledger books and write down and do all the addition and to make sure the book was exactly right and so forth. And that task went away. It's all done by software and computers. However, accounting just transformed, right? Accounting is still there because now instead of saying, hey, what I'm doing is I'm sitting there with my little ledger machine adding up columns, I'm thinking, okay, what's the analysis of what are our scenario plans? What are our points of vulnerability? How should we account for some of these numbers? How should we think about this strategically? And I think that's the kind of transformation we're going to see in all of this work. And then the tool can help us with it. And that's part of the reason why I think, we're currently in you said this AI thing was going to be big, and all it's really doing is helping my children with their homework. And it's like, yeah, that's a natural thing. By the way, remember the internet? First it was going to be everything, and then, oh gosh, there's nothing here other than some websites and some, kind of entertainment things, and now it's everywhere. And that pattern, I think, we are in with AI.
Share what are some of the sectors that you're most excited about there being disruption or kind of step function breakthroughs that you think AI are bringing? What are some of the specific examples that come to mind that give you a lot of hope and excitement?
Well, I think I'll start with an angle into that question, which is if you listen to a lot of the press discourse, it's like, well, what's really important is this AI thing is going to be revolutionary, it's going to create an altered landscape of power, and so the primary thing the press and government should be doing is constraining tech companies' ability to do that. And I understand the concerns, and actually I'm publishing a book called Super Agency to try to address those concerns and give a different lens of thinking about it. But if I thought what is the actual role of government in this stuff is we have line of sight on smartphones to a medical assistant on every smartphone that can run for, call it a couple of dollars an hour. That doesn't mean doctors can be out of work, because by the way, the medical assistant plus a doctor would be better. But there's all kinds of time where you don't have access to doctors. Maybe you're uninsured. Maybe you fell down when you're hiking in one of the beautiful hikes around here and need immediate access. Maybe it's 11 p.m. and you're worried about what's happening with your kid. Right? There's all of this thing. That's line of sight. We can build it today, right? So that's super exciting. And then when it gets to education, part of the education thing is you have an infinitely patient tutor for every subject, every age, and that means that that the same thing of like, okay, I need to learn now. I'm a marketer, and I need to learn now how to use AI to be to continue to be a professional in my job. Well, tutors to do that. So those are instances that I think we should want as soon as possible, right? And the important thing is to make it available to everybody, right? People have been able to, wealthy people have been able to afford tutors for, since maybe all time, and different definitions and so forth. But now it's like, well, for everybody, and that's that's the kind of thing that I think we should be wanting. Now, to just kind of provoke your mind a little bit, part of what's going to happen is your interface with a phone and interface with a computer is going to completely change. Because right now, what we've all learned, everyone in this room, including myself, is we've learned like that very specific language about like, oh, this is how you open the folder, this is how you launch the document, right? This is how you use, Word or something else in order to do that, and da-da-da. And we've all been learning that. We've all been constrained in how we use computational devices because they require very rigid semantics in order to function. Well, now, with generative AI, you're going to be able to do something like go to your computer and go, what would be a really new, interesting restaurant to go to in Denver tonight? Like, I love my old standbys, but like, is there something new and interesting? What would you recommend to me? And then we'll go figure it out and present it to you. And that's just like an instance of you're just talking to it like you would talk to a human being, and it can generate all of the necessary work to make that happen. And then if you wrap that back to, for example, like a medical assistant, you go, my lab is vomiting, right? Should I be concerned? What should I do? Et cetera, for making that happen. And that's there, and it's available to you right then. And by the way, part of having a good assistant is it might go, oh, you should head to the vet right now. And that's useful to know, right?
Good sign of urgency.
Yes.
You mentioned a little bit about the potential equity implications on things like tutoring. I think one of the questions people may raise is around how we make sure that the AI innovations are inclusive and equitable. Is there a risk of expanding inequalities rather than narrowing them? How should we think about and what guardrails we want in place or what incentives in place to make sure that the technology is driving inclusivity and equity as opposed to exacerbating?
Well, this is one of the things I really like about how the press discourse works, as opposed to the let's slow down and let's try to enshrine the past against the future. It's let's make sure that the future is inclusive, and here are some concerns about how to be attentive and inclusive in the future. And I think that's a good thing. And I think, broadly, one of the things that people don't sufficiently usually appreciate about businesses is businesses tend to be pretty responsive to customers and pretty responsive to communities kind of yelling at them. And so that's a good thing. And then they'll be figuring out what do we do for that. And as instances that this is already happening, if you look at, for example, we were introduced by honorable gentleman from Google, look at Google. Google provides these translate features entirely as a kind of a pro bono project. It's part of a demonstration. They don't make anything from it. And part of that is we should be giving guidance to Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all these companies, say, this is the kind of thing that we would really like to be helping our society. Because by the way, they'd like to be the good guys, right? And part of that, is to say, well, what are the things that are important to be inclusive? And you're not going to be able to be inclusive in everything, and you're not going to be able to be inclusive in everything the day one. It's an iterative, dynamic process. By the way, iterative, dynamic process is exactly how we work in all technology. I mean, if the car had been pitched as a 2-ton death machine that can run over children and possibly, kind of cause, major traffic accidents and everything else, we'd never have cars. And yet, if you think about the empowerment and agency in modern society, cars are essential, just about in certainly every major country, in almost every country. And so you have to have an iterative thing, and that doesn't mean you won't figure out seat belts until you're figuring out, you won't figure out airbags until you're in it, but it's a dynamic process as you're going. And that's why it's an ongoing dialogue. So the notion of inclusion is not, we're going to stop everything until everything's perfect minute one. It's, we're going to be doing iterative deployment, and then we're going to be going, hey, this is really important to change. This is really important to do stuff. And I think that the most important thing is that when you think about how the new set of skills are going to be how to use AI to do all this stuff, let's make sure that, one of the things that we love about, kind of the American dream, the broad-based, talent in all communities has access to learn it, potentially do it, potentially have career paths and jobs and all the rest around it. And I think that's at least that's one of the areas that I'm most focused on.
Let's lean into, obviously, you are an optimist about the opportunities for what AI can bring. I know you spent some of your life addressing folks that are pessimists or that are concerned about the risks. What are the right set of guardrails or protections that you think we should be mindful about deploying as a government, if you think there are, and how do you address the concerns that folks have around the potential downside risks?
Well, I thought, Kamala Harris, with the executive order around AI, did it nearly perfectly. And part of that, doing it nearly perfectly, was, Biden, doesn't really understand AI that well, so handed it over to Kamala. Kamala said, all right, I'll drive this. And so it's, brought a whole bunch of the leading companies and said, what are the things that are the most important issues? What are the things you will voluntarily agree to do in order to address risks, challenges, etc. And it was like watermarking of AI-generated content for misinformation and a bunch of other things that kind of went into that. Then they looked at that after having put some, I think everyone in this room has done this or participated in this. You sit down with, when you sit down with someone and you're saying, you can do better, you can do more, you can do more. That was what the voluntary commitments, they're pushing them to get as strong as they could. Then they looked and said, okay, so what do we have the legal powers going to do that are most important? And part of what they resolved to, which I think is the really smart thing, was they said, look, there's a couple of really big risks that we need to navigate, and in everything else we should be learning. So we want you to say, tell us you have a safety plan, tell us you're doing red teaming, and then give us information about what's happening, what's doing. Now, I would have recommended this to the Colorado legislature because, part of, recently a signed bill is let's try to prevent the future of software from being in Colorado, which doesn't strike me as a particularly smart play. I think that the important thing in it is to say, learn. Like, don't try to say, I have big stick with liability, because by the way, the tool set to do more important things for businesses, for citizens, for workers, for society, the tool set's gonna be getting richer. You want that tool set to be developed, and then you want to be going, wow, this one needs to be more inclusive, and this one needs to be tuned down a little bit. But that's the process. So it's a dialogue of learning, as opposed to I have an amorphous, poorly defined big accountability stick, which will quell investment and deployment.
Turns out to be not the strategy. And I think it's actually a credit to the community of business leaders here that rallied, I think, after that to work on some changes and improvements to make sure that that gets addressed. We're very excited that Denver will be very much open for business in this space, as we know in Colorado. Let me ask you a question. I mean, you used the phrase homo techne, sometimes the idea that we are essentially tool builders as a species. One of this is about how we learn to use those tools. And so if you were talking to, we have public sector leaders throughout the audience here today, people who run departments of transportation and infrastructure, who are school superintendents, who are police chiefs, who are mayors and chief operating officers of cities. How should public sector leaders be thinking about how, on a daily practice, we should be using and deploying AI as part of our problem solving?
So, the technology is being built in a lot of different ways, and so I'll start with the advice I give individuals, and then I will go to the kind of the public sector. The advice I give individuals is start playing with it, and start seeing on things that matter to you, like work that matters to you. Not like, oh, look, it's great to create a sonnet for your kid's birthday. Do that. But like, what's something that matters to you in the work you're doing? And you'll find some of it still not there. Like, for example, with my investing hat, when I use, GPT 1.0 or GPT 4, it doesn't really help me. It helps me with a due diligence list for technology areas that I don't understand that well. But like, for example, one of the things I did very early is I said, how should Reid Hoffman make money investing in AI? As a question to GPT 4, I wanted to see. And it basically gave me a business school professor's answer where the business school professor is very smart but doesn't understand venture capital. Right. So it was like, okay, that one doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you'll discover those as you do those. But but like Ethan Mullick of Wharton has a great line, which is the worst AI you'll ever use in your life is the AI you're using today. It's being developed. So being engaged in learning and trying things that kind of matter to you. And that's part of the reason I was starting with like even today, like if you have some concern with your dog or cat, you can go to these AIs and ask it, and you can get something that's actually kind of useful. Right? So, try it on things that matter to you, and that includes your work and all the rest. Now, when it gets to public sector stuff, there's a couple different, I think, principles that are important. One is to have the public sector kind of directing, incenting, enabling the tech development to be very good for the city, the county, the state, the country. And so that's part of what I was saying earlier is like going to the tech company and saying, well, it would be really helpful if you did this kind of stuff for us. Because by the way, the companies want to be the heroes, and they do, by the way, want, an ability to navigate available customers, kind of questions of development and liability. They want data, like all this stuff, and they want to be on the right side of it. So it's like, hey, we can do that if what you're doing is helping us with problems that we're trying to solve for our community, for our citizens. And I think that basically breaks into kind of call it like more boring things and more kind of sizzle things. And they're both important. But the boring things are like, well, we have a bunch of different programs. I mean, you know this a million times better than I do, but there's a bunch of different programs to help families, children, communities, whether it's, food, education, public transport, public safety, all of this stuff. Well, all of that can be made like much easier with AI. Because, for example, like one of the things that I see a whole bunch of people doing on like the medical thing is, something like 60% of doctors' times is filling out all the forms like post-visit. Well, yeah, I can do that today, right? And you get 2x your productivity from your doctor. Your doctor spends twice as much time with you, right? It's a great thing. So like do that, and that's the same thing in the public service, and that's what I mean by the kind of the boring things of, the awareness of these services, the ability to engage with them, the ability to use them. And then I think there's some really interesting things in terms of sizzle, which is, one of the things that I think is only a question of time is when societies say we want the equivalent of the public service app pre-installed on the home screen of every phone. Because we want to be able to do it with, hey, you see a pothole? Take a picture, send it to us. Let us know. Let's have a network of sensors and people help with it. hey, you see something happening, like a fight or something else, make an alert, right? You can be a version of public-private partnership with a whole network of citizens, right, for how it works. And all of that kind of stuff can be extremely important for a well-run city, a well-run community. People's sense of safety, people's sense of opportunity. And so I think it's literally only a question of when. Now, obviously, I said app, but part of it is you have and by the way, I don't think it'll just be one agent on the phone. I think you'll have multiple. But you'll have agents on the phone, and one of the agents will be hey, I'm encountering this problem. I have a flat tire. How can I get help? And it's like, okay, that's useful to do, as opposed to, today it's like, well, I hope I have something in the trunk, and if I don't have it in the trunk, I'm going to be kind of trying to wave at all the cars that are passing by and hope that a good Samaritan will stop. Or also, like start using my directory on my phone and kind of go, okay, is there a tow truck I can call? Anyway.
Maybe a funny visual, but I think in the world as we saw sort of previous to this is the public sector and the AI sector were sort of like two folks awkwardly at a party across the room, not willing to yet talk to each other. And the question is, how do we help make that match? I want to ask you a question a little bit from both sides. Like, what does the public sector need to do to make it easy and attractive for AI innovators, companies, to be inspired to want to build products and work with us? What is our obligation to walk across the room first? And I'll ask you the private sector version in a minute.
Well, as I said earlier, the key thing in this stuff is be dynamic and learning. So like when you called me and said, hey, I'm going to have this city AI summit, I was like, I absolutely want to help do that, because I think it's part of how, like in my book Impromptu, I described AI as amplification intelligence. It's kind of human amplification. I think that's exactly the kind of lens we should be doing. And so these dialogues are critical. And then at the next level of specificity, I think that, part of what you have to parse is there's a ton of things these companies can be doing with their teams and their compute budget, and companies tend to be most motivated by which of the most valuable franchises, e.g. with high revenue, high operating margins that they'll have over time, and they're playing a theory of a strategy, a theory of the game and how to get there. There's an offensive thing like new products, new strategies, and defensive, holding on to the ones I have. That's how to predict even startup companies, although startup companies tend to be, the metaphor I use for them is they jump off a cliff and you assemble an airplane on the way down, because by default you're dead. And it's one of the reasons why entrepreneurship and startups are so important, which I actually saw on your sponsor list, like Endeavor is here, and Endeavor's great for that, because entrepreneurship is how we create those new things. And so, I think that the question about the public sector is to say, we want you to enable you to do things that fit broadly within your national incentives. And it could be, revenue, although usually revenue is not, for the tech companies, revenue is usually much better from companies than from governments and other kinds of things. So it's, it's a little bit thing. But like, hey, if you develop this product with us, that will help you build all these other products, and we will help you navigate getting this product to market. We will help navigate political concerns, community concerns, and we can partner with you in doing that, in order to do that. And that's, whether it's education, how you and I got to know each other, trying to figure out how to help public schools, or anything else that goes within the kind of the civic responsibilities. Again, like for example, like one pitch might be, hey, this is a really easy application on top of stuff you have, and it could be a really good showcase of how you're helping cities. Would you just invest in it because it's useful for communities to understand that your company cares about them? And this is one we could help with. And by the way, sometimes companies go, yeah, that's not too expensive. We have a team, we'll do that. And then it's kind of, the dialogue is what figures out which things are the first things to do. Now, I'm not close enough to the problems that you as mayor navigate to have anything go fine off, but you've got some excellent people like Phaedra. Like Phaedra's the person I would call to ask that question.
We did. Well, you're lucky to get to see her today.
Yes.
So she's coming up soon.
Right. So anyway, but I think that's the process, and the thinking of, like, people tend to think, oh, public-private partnership, is that corruption? And it's like, well, it can be if it's give me a whole bunch of money for delivering no services that matter to people. That's like a bad outcome. But it can be awesome, which is just like, for example, the internet and like search and other kinds of things. Give me a bunch of good things that can help my citizens, and it's a win for both of us. So I think it's totally doable, and I think it's exactly the right thing to focus on.
And you talked a little about this, but the other side of that, what is the obligation of the private sector innovators in this space to be able to reach out and make it easier for public entities to partner at a time where some of their residents or constituents may have concerns? What is your advice to those folks who want to build that bridge? What are the things they can do to make it more likely public entities will partner with them?
Well, I think it's important to keep an open mind. One of the things that a lot of technologists in the current era kind of feel a little beleaguered of, like, I'll be hyperbolic here. You're creating AI that is already damaged our democracy, is going to challenge our jobs, and otherwise kind of ruin society, and you're doing it for your profit margin. We'd love to talk to you, and you're like, whoa! That is not why we're doing this, right? And if you take a look at it, just look at what products they're building and what kinds of things they're doing and how it works, and kind of why, for example, from a Microsoft perspective, Copilot is such an emphasis of how do you enable the human being to have more agency and more power and capabilities. And yes, there's a whole bunch of programs within Microsoft about how to be inclusive. There's hundreds of people who are employed by Microsoft to try to make sure that inclusion is part of the earliest design thinking and what you create, and that you will get there, iteratively over time. And so I think that's frequently a beleaguered state that a technologist finds themselves in. And so I think the encouragement is say, look, find the right people who want to create the future with you, who aren't saying technology in the future is just worse than life now, that with technology in the future we can create something that makes a big difference for people. And I want to do that. That doesn't mean I'm blind to risks and don't have navigation, but I want that outcome. And I think that it's a good thing for private sector folks to keep their minds open to this, which is exactly the reason why when you called me and said, hey, we're doing this now, will you come? I was like, yes.
So glad you did. Let me ask you a question about intellectual property in the AI world. I thought it was so fascinating when I watched you do the interview with your digital twin, where you uploaded all of the things you've ever written, and then the digital Reid Hoffman got to interview you and vice versa. Anyone obviously could go to Gen AI tool and say, write me a speech in the voice of Reid Hoffman, and they would be able to do that. How do we think about the protections for intellectual property in a moment where that capacity will be?
Well, I think we're going to evolve what we think, and what most people don't realize, like they start with the simple trope of, I have data ownership. But actually, in fact, if you look at even copyright is selective data ownership. There's a whole bunch of things that go into copyright. Like you read a book, I'm allowed to use some of it for fair use. If I buy the book, you can't tell me that I can't resell it or give it away to somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole stack of things where it's not that simple, and I think we're going to need to get to what's the new way of doing that. And part of the reason why we design copyright, we design patents and so forth, is to have the right kind of incentives for people to do work and create IP that's really valuable for society and have valuable economic careers doing that. We want to preserve that, we want to amplify that. But then also not say, because I, found was lucky enough to find an old Shakespeare manuscript, I now own this Shakespeare manuscript for all time. That's an example, not a truth. And so just didn't want to Reid discovered the whole Shakespeare thing. It'd be cool, but it hasn't happened. And so I think that the question is to not, too often the discussion is litigating the past. And the question is, what should the shape of the future be? And part of the shape of the future is it will change some of the landscapes. And part of what happens is people tend to want to say, well, I want my own circumstances to only be better. But we have a term for this, Luddites, right? Because it's like, well, like if kind of England hadn't embraced the loom and said, no, it's only hand weavers, like, I'm not sure you ultimately get to a middle class, right? And by the way, there's a challenge. It was difficult for the weavers. Now we have better tools in modern time to help with weaver equivalents, but we need to be kind of getting to that future, and that's kind of the key thing. And that doesn't mean that the future should be like all decided by technologists. That's one of the reasons why this dialogue is really important. And if you listen to a lot of the technologists they're like, they all say we need to have society in the loop, talking to us in various ways to make kind of the decisions about which parts of kind of the human rights, the human condition, enablement is actually in fact really important to double down on, preserve, build anew, in the next generation of technology.
Let me ask you a question about early adoption. Obviously, one of the things we want to do in Denver is to be able to say we want the city to be kind of an open API to innovators that are coming up with big solutions and then deploying them. There's a different burden when you are deploying solutions to public constituents and in public spaces, higher risks of failure, et cetera. How should public entities think about what it means to take a minimum viable product and be able to go out with it even though it might be faulty? And how do we communicate with the public to make them prepared for that so that we can maximize early adoption of exciting concepts?
It's a great question and hard to solve, as you know, which is the reason why you asked it. Roughly speaking, I think political leaders can't take very much risk that can end up with egg on their face, because then it becomes the challenge in their next election. And so, for example, federal government investing directly in solar energy companies ended up getting a bunch of people who were doing that kind of under attack, even though like solar diamonds, or it wasn't like there were private investors who were too, it wasn't a terrible idea. But those risks, whenever they play not out, what happens is someone grandstands that you knew that risk was not going to work and you failed at that risk. And unfortunately, we as human beings tend to have this, it was either manifest destiny when you win, or it was manifest destiny if you lose. And it isn't like a luck, probability, risk taking, et cetera, which is why we have a venture capital industry and do stuff, and why we have companies. Because companies were designed as technology to enable the taking of risk. So I think the part of the public-private partnership thing here is to say, look, the company needs to take some of the risks, e.g., if it blows up in your face, the stick hits the company, right? It's like you sucked, you did this badly, etc. And I think that's by nature how the public-private has to work. But companies should then just be compensated for that. Like, for example, when you look at the venture capital industry, I get grief when I invest in a Series A company that grows and blows up. And, people are like, oh, that was a terrible investment. That was, one more of those Silicon Valley venture capitalists hyping their dumbass technology and da-da-da-da. By the way, I do it because I think it will work. It doesn't always work. But when I have other ones that work, then the economic is worth the entire portfolio. And that's the reason why the companies are set up for doing the risk management. So in the public-private side, I think it's more of the risk should be borne by companies. But, the government can help them navigate the public can help them navigate those risks some. But then you just have to say, well, just like the reason why we invented companies as limited liability corporations as technology in the past to enable risk-taking behavior, to enable new industries and new products and new services. We do that, and then it just has to be an economic reward that risk is worth it.
You talked in your speech about just a shift a minute about the idea that this will be a new generation of Gen AI natives. This new generation of folks will be native to AI, and that's different from how people might have been native to other generations in tech. How will that change the way that they learn, and how will that change the way that they enter and contribute to the workforce? And how do we think about how we're changing the kind of skills we're looking for in people that contribute, given what they will grow up being able to know and do?
So let me start with a somewhat historical perspective. Most people here don't realize that when the printing press was invented, the public discourse was, this is going to end society. It's going to cause the spread of misinformation. The experts who otherwise are trained deeply in how to use the information are no longer in control of it, and that information is now out and about everyone. And that was the discourse. So, not surprisingly, as we go through waves of technology, both before then and after then, that is the first thing that the critics who are trying to help, kind of navigate our human future start with. Now, that being said, think about, for example, what the internet meant for how cognition works. So, prior to the internet, and by the way, even more intensely in earlier times, pre-writing, pre-printing press, memory was considered to be an extremely important part of intelligence because, well, there is no access, no library, there's no access, etc. So person one is a lot smarter than person two when person one's memory works a lot better. And so that was a really important part of intelligence. Now you come to today and you go, well, how important it is to remember what was on page 34 of that book. That's not very. You just have to remember that it was in the book and then you can go find it, right? And so intelligence changes, and education therefore changes. And so part of the speech I was giving at Bologna last year was to say, we want to think about this is how we're enabling our next generation, Gen AI, to accomplish the most kind of humanist of tasks, including learning. Because that questions around how does my intelligence work, what's most important, and so forth. I'll give another parallel, which is when GPT-4 launched, basically, what you can hear from most of the US was a hue and cry of, oh my God, everyone's going to be cheating on their essays. And I was like, well, look, if I was a teacher and I said I'm going to teach I'm now veering in an area that you have a lot more expertise than I, but what the hell, right? If I'm a teacher and I'm saying, hey, write an essay on Jane Austen and reflections on gender and colonialism, what I would have just done is gone to GPT-4, created 10 essays from that, and say, and these essays are D-minuses. Right? So you gotta be better than this. Right? So go use the tool, but you gotta be better than this. Right?
Change the curve.
Yeah, and so, because then, by the way, they have a tool by which they can start doing it. They can start understanding what does a really good essay look like? What is a good insight count? What is like when you're doing on one hand you have argument A, on one hand you have argument B, and here's how you resolve the tension, focusing on that versus the mechanics of compare and contrast essays or other kinds of things. And I think that's part of the technology of the future, and that's part of what we'll be having with, that's one of the reasons why the younger folks are always much more native to the new technologies, digital natives, internet natives, and now AI natives than the older folks.
One of the things I love is listening to you think through ways that this can be disruptive, innovative, transformative for sectors people haven't thought of before. So I'm going to just give you a couple of just random intractable city problems that we deal with all the time for you to respond to.
He did not prep me.
I did not prep you for this at all, but I know you're always ready for it. Think about what innovations do you see possible in this space, or how should we be thinking about how AI can be deployed on this space? You mentioned one earlier. Let's just take that old adage, traffic. What is possible, or how should we be thinking about what AI can do to help us solve a problem as common as traffic?
Well, there's a ton of stuff. So one of the portfolio companies that I've invested in is called Naudo. And one of the things they have learned is 10% of the drivers cause over 50% of the accidents. And if you think...
We know who you are.
Yes. Actually, one of the problems is we don't. you were getting to where technology and AI can make a difference. It's like, which drivers should you make sure are the ones that tend to look at their phone when they're driving? Distracted driving is an issue. It's one of the things that, kind of NATO focuses on. What kinds of things could you reprogram the light grid to get out of, I don't know what kind of, deadlock, gridlock happens here, but like obviously a huge problem for cities. Well, could you actually have a kind of like, okay, here's how we clear through it and kind of work the thing to not have, oh, look, the car is stuck in the intersection and therefore everyone is stuck, right? It's kinds of ways. All of those are software problems. I mean, yes, you need sensors and you need algorithms and you need data and you need a bunch of other stuff, but that's all solvable. And it's one of the reasons why, in addition to NATO, which is kind of a human networked, how do you make each car a networked device that helps safety and eliminate distracted driving and all the rest of the stuff. I also did autonomous vehicles because we want autonomous vehicles to get here, especially when it gets to highways and trucks and else. But we want them to get here because if everything was AV today, the over 40,000 deaths that we have per year in the U.S., and that's just deaths. There's also injuries and all the rest, the medical thing. That would probably go down by 75 or more %. That's huge. And like I wrote an essay on this very early at LinkedIn, where I said, drinking and driving goes from, with autonomous vehicles, goes from an evil thing that you do risking other people's lives to something that, you might do every day. Because, hey, you're not driving. You're not driving.
That's great. See, that's why I loved asking, so you have a great answer. How about it? Because I think what we're after is both pushing private sector innovators to think about ways in which you can tool build or innovate on solutions that would have massive markets. If you can come up with a tool that's going to help make traffic move 20% faster, there are literally billions of dollars being deployed every day in cities around the country to solve that problem that probably could be solved much more effectively with an AI tool. Another one that both is very expensive and obviously has huge human costs is crime. How do we think about ways in which AI can be used as a tool to help support and intervene on the crisis of crime?
Well, I think one of the things that's really, I was mentioning a little bit in the app. I mean, think if what you had is every citizen, because phones tend to be validated. I mean, yes, there are prepaid phones, but phones tend to be validated. This one's Mike's, this one's Reid, and so forth. And say you had the ability to participate in call it a 911 app, right? Then the entire citizenry, which cares a lot about like diminishment of crime, safety, nonviolence, etc., is enabled. And it's like I can go, oh, I'm seeing something, right? I want to report it. And then obviously, part of what happens is, well, is this person actually seeing something? Are they inventing something because they hate their neighbor? Blah, 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 blah. And, but AI can help with all that. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but it means that you can actually have much quicker response. You can do recordings, so it kind of becomes and it's like a safe thing. Like for example, if you see one person beating up another, getting involved is like risky and challenging. Like if you're small or anything else, it's like it can be challenging. You don't know if they have a knife or a gun. It's like all this stuff. Whereas you take a picture, you go, I see a problem. Right, and that allows response, and that's part of it's another version of kind of public-private partnership. So I think it's kind of that's just the beginning. I think of things that could be empowering of the citizenry to say, hey, we work with our services to make our community safer.
I agree. I think that's one of the places where we see real possibilities for win-win, right? There's a technology, an AI technology now that some police departments use, which right now we find is the most significant impact on reducing the over-incarceration of people of color and reducing the total number of crimes is actually the number of officers you have on the street, because officers are actually a preventative tool.
Yes.
The biggest challenge to their time right now is sort of like your nurse example. Many officers, you respond to a domestic violence situation, you might spend 4 hours writing the report. from that event. That's 4 hours you're down on the street. So there's an AI tool that uses the body-worn camera that takes all of the audio from that conversation. You're there, body-worn camera captures it all. Body-worn camera processes it all, pre-writes the draft of the report in 10 seconds, and now the officer can approve that. But there are two benefits. One is you save a bunch of officer time. The second is it's actually a much more objective description of the event than you might have gotten from the officer herself or himself. And so folks that are worried about police accountability, it's actually helpful. Folks that are worried about protecting police officers' time, you get both.
And by the way, another thing of enabling it is, oh, there have been 3 other domestic violence calls here with these people. Here's the available previous information to go in with some readiness.
Yeah, great example. We just have a couple of minutes left. As you think about guidance you would have for us, if you were to talk to both the city and leaders here and to the ecosystem of innovators here, what are the most important things for us to be focused on in the next couple of years to make this a place where we can easily and aggressively adapt solutions that will make an impact?
Well, it's a bias towards experimentation. Right? Like anyone who tells you this is exactly what it's going to look like 5 years from now is either deluding themselves or deluding you or both. Right? We have this major wave coming, and the best way to do it is to experiment with it. And that was part of the reason I, kind of was indicating my expert opinion that that recent Colorado AI bill was bad, right? Because it's this question of enable experimentation. And that doesn't mean that there won't be problems and risks, and that's a little bit of the reason why you try to shift those to companies that try to navigate them and can bait with stick, et cetera. But that bias towards let's learn something, let's try to do something. It's like I was really appalled when I was reading about some schools. We're banning GPT-4 in our school. And you're like, well, you should be encouraging people to use it, right? You should be learning from it. It doesn't mean that there won't be some like, oh, how do I do my homework differently, and how do I do all this stuff, and that's a change of work process. But like, how do I do that? And experimenting and trying things is, I think, fundamental. Whether it's your position in government, whether it's citizens, whether it's companies, and you go, well, we're not quite sure what the risks are here. Then experiment small, right? It's how we make innovation is spelled RISK, right? And so that is extremely important to do.
So helpful. I mean, I think this is the spirit of how we've tried to approach this. One of the things we've done in Denver is try to familiarize the public with we will take big swings at hard problems like homelessness. We're going to try to get 1,000 people off the street and set that public target and then deliver on it, which we successfully did. But there will be times we'll take big swings and not succeed. But what we found is some people like the idea, some people dislike the idea. We had a lot of arguments about it, a lot of public community meetings. But in the end, people's satisfaction is much higher at the city about how we're approaching it. I think because what they're saying is, not sure if this idea will work, but they're trying it.
Yes.
They're going to innovate, they're going to come up with a strategy, they're going to implement it, and if it doesn't work, you'll learn from it. Right?
Yes,
Ultimately,
exactly.
That's the spirit we want to be able to bring.
1,000%.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you give a huge round of applause, please, for your